going to introduce to you the 9 modal verbs in English. I will tell you its rules, when to use them, and how to use them. So hopefully, as you leave this lesson, you will feel a lot more comfortable in using those modal verbs in English grammar. So let's get started. Hi everybody, I'm back. For today's lesson, we will be focusing on the 9 modal verbs in English grammar. But before that, let us all define what is a modal verb. A modal verb comes from a larger category of auxiliary verb that is usually used to express modality, that is likelihood, ability, possibility, probability, necessity, obligation, or asking a permission. Okay, so what are those 9 modal verbs we can use in English grammar? Look at this here, guys. We have the might, the must, may, can, could, will, would, shall, and should. If you know or remember your 9 modal verbs, that is great. But if you can't remember them or memorize them, just follow this very easy pattern so you won't get lost or won't get wrong with that. Now let's move on to the 5 rules in the proper usage of the modal verbs in English. The first one, infinitive comes after modal verb, but without to. For example, I can speak French. She will go to the beach. Number 2 rule. Modal verb does not take S, especially in the 3rd person singular. What do I mean by that? No matter what your subject is, it may be a singular subject, you don't change the form of your modal verb. It remains exactly the same as it is. Number 3, modal verb does not change its form in according to the tense. So no matter what your tense is, if you're using present tense, past tense, or future tense, your modal verb will remain the same in its form. Number 4 rule. For the negative modal verbs or using a negative form of modal verbs, look at this pattern. The first one is we have might, might not, mightn't, must, must not, mustn't, may, may not. There is no construction form or short form for may. Can, cannot, can't. Could, could not, couldn't. Shall, shall not, shan't. Should, should not, shouldn't. So those are the negative form and construction form of the negative modal verbs. Let's go to rule number 5. Rule number 5 is forming the interrogative phrase of modal verbs. The pattern is modal verb plus subject plus your main verb. You understand? Okay. Now let's take the first modal verb. Let's go to might. Might is a modal verb that expresses possibility. For example, she might give you a discount. He might eat lunch here. Understand? Number 2 modal verb, may. You use may also to express possibility. It's it is somehow the same with might. For example, the teachers may be late today. Or you can use may for asking permission. May I go home? May I talk to you? May I go out? Next modal verb is must. Must is used to express probability or logical assumption. Example number 1. She must be stuck in the traffic. You can also use must to express necessity, or a person must do that because if she or he won't do it, there will be consequence. For example, you must go to the doctor. You look very, very sick. You look very sick. Okay? You can also use must, for prohibition or to do something that is prohibited. For example, you must not use your phone in my class. Alright? Next modal verb is can. Can is a modal verb that expresses ability. For example, I can speak Italian and French. That's ability. I'm able to do that. Or you can also use to ask a question. Can you help me with this? Like that. You understand? Or you can also use them for suggesting someone. You can try this food. It's delicious. Okay? Now let's move on to the modal verb could. Could is somehow the same with can, but could is more polite when you're asking a question. So could is used to ask a polite question. For example, could you lend me a hand? Could you do me a favor? Okay? Or you can also use them to offer something. I could help you with this. Or willingness to do something for somebody. You understand? Okay. Now let's move on to the next modal verb. Will. Will is a modal verb that indicates future time. For example, I will visit my grandparents tomorrow. Or you can also use them to offer something or to ask a question. Will you go with me to the movies? Okay. Now let's move on to the modal verb would. Would is somehow the same with will but what's make it different from will is that would is more polite when you're asking a question. For example, would you lend me a helping hand? Or would you do me a favor? You're asking a permission or you're asking a question. Next one is you use would for invitation, like I would like to invite you to my wedding by the next month. Like that. Or you can also use them to show preferences. I would like to have a cup of coffee. Or you can use them to offer something. Would you like a cup of coffee? That's a modal verb, you would. Now let's go to the modal verb shall. Shall is used for confirmation. For example, I shall see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. That's for a confirmation. For another example, I shall return to New York tomorrow. Confirmation. Now let's go to should. Should is suggesting something. You use them to suggest somebody that it is a right thing, for them to do. For example, you should try reading this book. It's very interesting. You understand? Okay. So those are the modal verbs in English grammar that you can possibly use. And I hope, again, this video have given you a little glimpse in using the 9 modal verbs in English. And hopefully, guys, you could show me your example sentences with the usage of the modal verbs that we have discussed in this video. I would like to see them in the comment box below. And we could share our beautiful sentences with the proper usage of our modal verbs in English. And if you want to be more updated with my latest and with my new English lessons, don't forget to, if you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click that red button over there. And you will be updated with my latest English lessons.